A young black man, David Thompson, was walking along the sidewalk, his gaze forward, his steps purposeful. He didn't know that today would change his life forever. As he passed a local coffee shop, a police car suddenly screeched to a halt beside him. The door swung open and a towering figure stepped out. A cop whose mere presence seemed to swallow the space around him. Officer William Stokes, a notorious officer known for his aggressive tactics and racial profiling, was here. David paused for a moment, his stomach tightening. He'd heard about Stokes, the kind of cop who pulled over black men for the most trivial reasons, the one who seemed to revel in his power. Stokes was glaring at David now, his eyes cold and calculating. Without any warning, he barked, "Where are you going?" David, taken aback, stammered, "I'm just walking to the store, officer." The cop stepped closer, his massive frame looming over David. "You've got a problem with the way I'm asking questions?" His voice was low and menacing. David's heart began to race. He had been stopped countless times before, but this felt different, more dangerous. The people around them had already started to slow down, watching. The crowd had begun to take notice. It was in this moment, as the tension peaked, that a man in a sharp suit, his face familiar from countless news stories, emerged from the coffee shop. Adam Walker, a tech billionaire and philanthropist, had just finished his meeting and was heading back to his car. Adam, a man known for his social media activism and commitment to racial justice, had never been one to shy away from injustice. As he stepped into the scene, he immediately saw what was happening. The sight of Stokes towering over David sent a jolt of anger through him. Without hesitation, Adam moved toward the confrontation. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the thick air. "Hey, what's going on here?" The cop turned, eyes narrowing. "This is none of your business." Adam stood his ground. "Actually, it is. You're harassing this man for no reason." The crowd was starting to murmur, and whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone knew who Adam was. The crowd's reaction was a mix of disbelief and curiosity, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the cop. Was Adam Walker really stepping in to defend a random person on the street? Before we go further, do you believe we should all take a stand when we witness injustice? Hit that subscribe button and join us in exploring what happens next. Let's see how far this confrontation goes. Adam's words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The tense silence stretched, thickening with the weight of unspoken truths. Officer Stokes's face contorted with rage, his usually composed demeanor shattered by the sting of public defiance. The power dynamics were shifting, and he didn't like it. He wasn't used to anyone, let alone a billionaire tech mogul, daring to challenge his authority in such a public manner. "You're making a mistake," Stokes spat, his hand hovering near his holster, a subtle but dangerous gesture. "I'm doing my job." His voice was low and threatening, trying to regain control of the situation. Adam stood his ground, unwavering. His expression was calm, collected, a stark contrast to the anger radiating from Stokes. Adam knew that in moments like this, staying composed was the key to disarming the aggression. "No, you're not. You're bullying this man because of his skin color. That's not your job." The words hit with a force that left a lingering echo in the air. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the tension palpable. David, still standing frozen in place, felt a strange mix of emotions well up inside him: fear, relief, and gratitude. He had been cornered before. He'd witnessed firsthand what could happen when officers like Stokes were allowed to wield unchecked power. Briefly removed, he had racked his mind at seeing Adam, someone with such influence and wealth, standing up for him in such a public and unapologetic way, gave him a strange sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. It was as if, for the first time, someone was willing to stand in the gap for him, someone who wasn't just another face in the crowd around them. The crowd had grown larger. People had begun recording on their phones, capturing every moment of the confrontation. The air was thick with anticipation, a buzz of murmurs and whispers reverberating through the crowd. Some bystanders shifted uneasily, unsure of how to react, caught between the weight of the situation and their own discomfort. Others whispered support, rallying behind Adam, offering silent solidarity, but most were frozen, simply watching, waiting for the next move. Would Adam's words carry enough weight to make a difference? Or would Officer Stokes double down and crush this challenge to his authority? Stokes, his temper now fully ignited, reached for his radio. His fingers fumbled slightly, betraying his rising frustration. "I'm calling for backup," he growled, his tone low and menacing. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I know exactly who you are," Adam said, his voice cutting through the air with the precision of a scalpel. "And you're in the wrong here. This man deserves respect, just like anyone else." His words were simple, but they carried a force that couldn't be ignored. They were a quiet challenge to the status quo, a demand for justice in the face of power. The atmosphere crackled with tension. What would happen next? Would Stokes resort to his usual bullying tactics, playing the game of intimidation until the situation diffused? Or would the crowd's growing opposition, fueled by the courage of one man, force him to back down? The silence stretched longer, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone involved. Adam's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the quiet like a shot fired into the stillness. He quickly pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen as he typed a message. "This is happening right now. Share this. Let's make it clear that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." His fingers moved with determination, driven by a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with personal gain and everything to do with standing up for what was right. Within moments, he posted the video of the confrontation to his social media, tagging local news outlets and sending it to his millions of followers. The impact was immediate. Within seconds, the video was circulating rapidly, reaching beyond the crowd and the moment, resonating with people far and wide. The video captured not just the confrontation, but the essence of what was at stake. It showed the raw, unfiltered truth, a man using his power to exploit another, and the resolve of someone willing to stand against that injustice. As the video went live, the online world exploded. Comments, shares, and reactions flooded in from every corner of the globe. Adam's name was trending, not because of his wealth or influence, but because he had chosen to use his platform for something bigger. The story began to shift, morphing from a simple confrontation on a street corner to a global rallying cry against systemic injustice. People were no longer watching, they were joining the movement, adding their voices to the growing chorus of those demanding change. And in that moment, a shift began. The fight was far from over, but the tide had turned. The world was watching. The moment Adam posted the video, everything changed. The shift was immediate, like the snap of a taut wire finally giving way under pressure. The crowd that had gathered around them began to stir, the energy in the air crackling with new intensity. The once passive bystanders, those who had remained silent in the face of the escalating tension, began to take sides. It was as if a collective breath was released, and the power dynamics were now in play. Some people shouted at Officer Stokes, urging him to back off, their voices filled with righteous anger. Others cheered for Adam, applauding his courage to challenge the authority before him. The cheers grew louder, like a wave of support that only swelled with time. But the ripple effect didn't stop at the crowd. It spread far beyond the street corner, sweeping through the city with the force of a wildfire. Across the digital world, the video went viral almost immediately. Social media exploded with reaction. The hashtags surged, trending not only in local circles, but across national and even global platforms. People from all walks of life, from ordinary citizens to high prefigural activists, celebrities, and politicians, began to weigh in. They shared their thoughts, tagging one another, sparking debates, and calling for justice. Everyone had an opinion, and soon the conversation had grown into a movement of its own. The world was watching. The conversation was no longer confined to just the incident. It had become a catalyst for something much larger. It was as if a door had been opened and people were flooding in to share their voices, their experiences, their demands for change. David, still standing there, his heart pounding in his chest, couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions. He had been a faceless victim in the eyes of many before this, just another statistic, another black man harassed by the police, another name lost in the system. But now, with Adam standing beside him, his story was being told, and the world was listening. The attention was overwhelming, yet there was a flicker of pride that rose within him. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a voice, and it was being heard. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a mix of disbelief and gratitude swirling in his chest. Exercise, strengthening your brain with meditation. Officer Stokes, realizing the tide had turned, stood at a crossroads. His once unshakable confidence was now visibly faltering. His face flushed with frustration, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. He realized he was losing control of the narrative, and that was something he wasn't accustomed to. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting around, trying to assert his dominance. But the power had shifted. Reluctantly, he retreated to his patrol car, his radio crackling with communication from his department. But the noise was now distant, irrelevant. The sound of the crowd's growing dissent filled the air, louder and more insistent with every passing second. The crowd didn't let him off so easily. As Stokes climbed into his car, some people shouted insults, their voices sharp with the sting of collective indignation. A few raised their middle fingers, a defiant gesture aimed at the officer who had crossed a line. Adam stood tall, his eyes fixed on the retreating officer, his body a pillar of quiet strength. His gaze didn't waver. He had done what he needed to do. The car doors slammed shut, and with a screech of tires, Stokes sped off into the distance, retreating into the anonymity of his uniform. But the energy in the air remained, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. As the police car disappeared from view, Adam turned to David, his expression softening. He extended his hand, his voice calm but filled with genuine concern. "You good?" David shook his hand, his grip firm but trembling. A mix of gratitude, disbelief, and a deep, unspoken bond passed between them in that brief moment. "Yeah, thanks to you," he said, his voice hoarse as if the act of speaking still felt surreal. The crowd began to disperse, but the energy lingered, refusing to fade away. People exchanged numbers, shared their thoughts, and engaged in impassioned conversations about what had just unfolded before them. Was this just a single moment of defiance, a fleeting spark that would soon be extinguished? Or was it the beginning of something bigger? The questions lingered, hanging in the air like a challenge to everyone who had witnessed the events. Were they willing to sit back and let things continue as they had been? Or would they rise to the occasion, ready to make a stand? The story didn't end here, not by a long shot. The confrontation that had played out on that street corner was only the beginning. As the hours passed, the story made headlines, quickly spreading across news outlets, blogs, and online platforms. It sparked conversations in coffee shops, boardrooms, and living rooms. People debated the implications, questioned the status quo, and examined their own complicity in the system that allowed this kind of behavior to continue. The questions lingered, demanding answers. How many others had faced this same kind of harassment without a voice? How many times had people stood idly by, unsure of what to do or too afraid to act? Adam Walker had used his platform, his influence, and his position in the world to make a stand. And in doing so, he had reminded the world that standing up for what's right isn't just about being a hero in a moment of crisis. It's about starting a conversation that demands change. He had taken a single act of courage and turned it into a movement. He had shown that one person, armed with nothing more than conviction and a platform, could spark a fire that would burn through the complacency of a system in need of reform. As the days unfolded, the impact of that single moment became undeniable. The conversation didn't die down, it grew, and with each passing day, the world was forced to reckon with the question Adam had raised. The question that now reverberated in every corner of society. When will we choose to stand for what's right, and when will we stop letting fear and power control the narrative? The world was watching, and it was time for change. What do you think will happen next? Will this act of defiance spark a bigger movement? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more incredible stories like this.